The printing press was invented by Gutenberg in the mid-15th century. The technology revolutionised the spread of knowledge in Europe. It contributed to the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, and the Renaissance. At the time, one of the most powerful empires in the world was the Ottoman Empire, controlling parts of Europe, Asia, and North Africa. In 1515, the Ottoman Sultan issued a decree partially banning the use of the printing press. Now, among the reasons for the ban was this. The introduction of the press would have caused it, the government, to lose one of its most important sources of influence over the Muslim population, its monopoly over the transmission of religious knowledge. Now, in 2024, it's not just the printing press that plays a part in the transmission of knowledge and the refining of ideas, but the digital printing press, the internet, and love it or hate it, as part of it, social media. And like the Ottomans of the 16th century, those who want to control the narrative are issuing their own decrees when it comes to the online public square. Now, to respond to a problem, you have to diagnose it. When we talk about global censorship, it doesn't just mean there's a lot of it going on around the globe, although that's true. The increase that we see is not just coincidental. There is a level of coordination on a number of fronts. First, we see coordination between the content watchdogs and the blockers. These watchdogs include fact-checking organisations, many of which receive government funding. A couple of weeks ago, the US House Committee on Small Business released a report on its investigation into federally funded censorship. This is one of its key findings. The federal government has funded, developed and promoted entities that aim to demonetize news and information outlets because of their lawful speech, impacting domestic businesses' operations, reputation, customer reach, and revenue. This apparatus has been described as the censorship industrial complex. Secondly, there is a level of coordination between the international and the national levels. Right now, many countries are currently or have recently been considering hate speech bills or misinformation type bills. Australia, Ireland, South Africa, and so on. Again, this is not a coincidence. This is being pushed at the international level. And I want to give you just one example of how it works. The World Health Organization has been working on a pandemic agreement. It is intended to shape how the world responds to a future pandemic. So you would think it would be full of medical and scientific language, and it is. But the first draft also required states to tackle things like infodemics, defined as too much information, and to combat, pay attention to that language, to combat false and misleading information. Our team in Geneva engaged with states from around the world, and as they recognised the problem, we saw that language significantly improve in the draft as it now stands. So we know that national legislation can be a challenge when it comes to the right to free speech, but this is not just a national issue. If we tackle it only at the national level, we will have failed to confront one of the root drivers. Finally, the third place this interplay happens is between public and private entities. Not the fact-checkers, but the platforms themselves. For example, you may have seen Zuckerberg's letter to Congress, in which he admitted, with some regret, that Facebook had censored content. Meanwhile, at a European Union level, there is a code of conduct on online hate speech. Periodic reports are produced in which the companies breathlessly compete on how quickly they reviewed and took down reported posts. The reality is that global censorship demands a global response. And the cases we've been involved in so far have generally fallen into one of four categories. First, non-criminal sanctions for posting. For example, the case of Rodrigo Iván Cortés. He's a former Mexican congressman, a civil society leader, and he found himself charged with gender-based political violence. To be clear, not violence, just posts. For posts referring to a member of Congress who identifies as a woman using biologically accurate pronouns. The court ordered him to pay a fine, to post a public apology on his social media accounts, and to enrol on a re-education course. We are currently challenging this before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Next up, we are fighting back against the criminal consequences for simply posting. Of course, Päivi in Finland is waiting for her criminal case to be heard before the Supreme Court for a Bible tweet. Meanwhile, in Egypt, we are advocating for the release of Abdelbaki Saeed Abdo and Noor Gergis, both of whom have been in pre-trial detention for more than 2 years for their contributions to a Facebook group for Christian converts from Islam. Third, there is the issue of platforms being forced to remove posts. For example, take Billboard Chris, Canadian father, wearer of sandwich boards stating children cannot consent to puberty blockers. He's got a popular account on X. He went online to criticise the World Health Organization's appointment of a transgender activist to a global transgender policy advisory board. Well, that activist complained to Australian authorities, who in turn ordered that X remove the content. We're working with Chris to challenge that before the courts in Australia. And then finally, if you can't prohibit or prosecute the individuals, you can always ban the platforms, as we've seen most recently with X in Brazil. That's examples from 5 continents. And before we think, but that wouldn't happen wherever you're listening to this, my guess is that that's what some Brazilians would have said. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris is quoted as saying, and she's talking about social networks here, they are directly speaking to millions and millions of people without oversight or regulation, and it has to stop. And before I'm accused of targeting anywhere, this is global. The UK Science and Technology Government Minister warned in July that when it comes to regulating social media, nothing is off the table. These are some of the areas in which we're already pushing back, but I want to outline 3 challenges as well. First, many of these cases defy traditional jurisdictional boundaries. Just take Billboard Chris. He is a Canadian. He posted on an American-owned platform, and now Australia is claiming the right to censor him. There are many similar examples. The reality is global censorship demands a global response. Second, there is an increasing technological sophistication of this censorship. It can be faster than ever before. We might not know it's happening. AI can be something of a black box, and so on. Third, combating global censorship is increasingly complex due to the elevated role of private actors in the digital age. Let me give you just one example that goes deeper than X or Meta. AWS, Amazon Web Services, is now responsible for powering about 1/3 of the internet. Back in 2019, a Gizmodo journalist conducted an experiment. Now, the headline of the article tells you what she tried, and spoiler alert, what happened. I tried to block Amazon from my life. It was impossible. She used a number of digital tools to prevent her devices using Amazon infrastructure. What happened? Well, Netflix, despite being an Amazon competitor, stopped working. She couldn't track her runs on Runkeeper. Signal and Slack went down. Work was difficult, and so on. Now turn that around so it isn't a journalist preventing themselves using Amazon's infrastructure, but a provider preventing an individual or organization from using it. We saw just that happen when Amazon removed Parler. It shows that with essentially one click of a button, an entire service can be made inaccessible for the world almost instantaneously. Let me close with this. The battle for speech in 2024 is a multi-jurisdictional challenge like no other. It is one of the great challenges of our time, and yet victory is possible. In the last 18 months, the Irish government has been pushing to pass a hate speech bill that has been described as worst in the West. At the start, I heard it was inevitable. It had broad support. It had limited opposition. But along with a broad alliance, we raised our voice, and just recently, the government has announced that it is dropping this inevitable bill. Free speech is the foundation of every democratic society, and we cannot tire of protecting it.